For most of human existence, life moved without boundaries. There were no cities rising from the ground, no walls dividing land, no systems of taxation, and no rulers claiming authority over others. People followed opportunity. If food became scarce, they simply moved on. If tensions grew within a group, distance solved the problem. When harsh seasons arrived, survival meant changing direction, not fighting to stay. Freedom was not an idea, it was the ability to walk away. Then, roughly 12,000 years ago, that pattern broke. Humanity made a decision, or perhaps faced a situation, where leaving was no longer an option. From that point forward, everything changed, and there was no returning to the old way of life. Early human communities were small and tightly connected. A group might consist of 20 people, maybe 50 at most. Everyone knew each other, their strengths, their habits, even their moods. They understood the land just as deeply, the paths animals followed, the cycles of seasons, the hidden sources of food. Their diet was diverse and balanced, drawn from hunting, fishing, and gathering a wide range of natural resources. Power, as we think of it today, barely existed. If someone tried to dominate or control others, the group had a simple solution: they could leave. Nothing tied them down. There was no concept of owning land, no fixed borders, and no way for anyone to build lasting control. Stability, in the modern sense, did not exist, and that was exactly what kept power in check. At the end of the last ice age in the Near East, conditions began to shift. Vast fields of wild wheat spread naturally across valleys, creating an unusually rich food source. Large herds of gazelles passed through predictable routes, and water appeared with seasonal reliability. For the first time, the land offered enough consistency to encourage staying in one place longer than usual. Some groups began to settle, just a little at first. They constructed simple circular homes from stone. They dug storage pits to keep food for later. They used heavy grinding stones to process grains, tools far too large to carry from place to place. These choices were small, but they marked the beginning of something irreversible. Importantly, they were not yet farmers. They did not plant crops or fully control the land, but they also didn't leave anymore. They were caught in between two worlds, no longer fully nomadic, but not yet truly settled. Then, around 10,800 BC, the environment turned against them. The climate cooled once again. Resources that had once been abundant became unreliable, seasons grew unpredictable, and survival became more difficult. But now, everything was different. Villages existed, food had been stored, populations had grown, especially with more children depending on stability. Returning to a mobile lifestyle was no longer realistic. Too much had changed, and too many lives depended on staying put. The options were harsh and unforgiving: reduce the size of the group or find a way to control the land itself. They chose control. Instead of following nature, they began to shape it. Seeds were selected and replanted. Wild plants were deliberately managed. Water was redirected to support growth. What began as adaptation quickly turned into transformation. The evidence is written directly into human remains. Archaeological skeletons from early farming communities reveal a clear shift in physical condition. Heights decreased noticeably, a sign of poorer overall nutrition. Teeth show heavy decay, damaged by diets overloaded with starchy grains. Bones tell a harsher story: compressed spines, worn joints, and bodies shaped by relentless, repetitive labor. The burden was especially visible in women. Many spent hours each day grinding grain, often in kneeling positions that strained the body over time. This constant posture led to long-term damage, chronic pain, joint deformities, and lasting injuries in the knees and lower back. What had once been a varied and balanced way of eating narrowed dramatically, with wheat replacing dozens of natural food sources. Life expectancy did not dramatically increase, but the quality of life declined. People worked longer hours, consumed less diverse nutrition, and became more vulnerable to disease. In many ways, the rise of early civilization marked not progress in health, but a measurable physical decline. Farming also introduced a new kind of risk. Unlike hunting or gathering, which offered flexibility, a cultivated field demanded time and patience. Crops took months to grow, and if they were lost, whether to weather or theft, everything could disappear overnight. For the first time, humans created something fixed, something valuable, and something that needed protection. This shift led directly to the construction of defenses. In places like Jericho, massive stone walls rose several meters high. These structures were not built as symbols of dominance, but as safeguards for stored grain. Where resources could be accumulated, they could also be stolen, and that reality demanded protection. Further east, in the region of Mesopotamia, the challenge was even greater. The Tigris River and Euphrates River did not behave predictably. They flooded without warning, dried up unexpectedly, and frequently changed their course. Managing these rivers required large-scale coordination, digging canals, maintaining barriers, and constantly adjusting water flow. This level of effort could not be handled by individuals or small groups. It demanded organization. Someone had to plan, others had to enforce, and decisions had to be centralized. Power was no longer temporary or situational. It became structured, embedded, and continuous. By around 3800 BC, the city of Uruk had grown into a massive urban center. Tens of thousands of people lived together, many of them strangers with no personal connection to one another. This new scale of society required new systems of control and communication. Writing emerged in this environment, but not for storytelling or culture, at least not at first. It was developed as a tool of administration to track grain supplies, assign labor, and record obligations. The earliest written records were not myths, but accounts, lists, inventories, and transactions. Archaeologists uncovered millions of nearly identical clay bowls in these ruins. Each bowl represented a measured ration, a controlled distribution of food. This marked a profound shift. Food was no longer something individuals gathered for themselves. It became something handed out by a system. With that change, independence faded. Workers were no longer self-sufficient. They depended on centralized authority for survival. And as resources became tightly controlled, conflict intensified. Disputes over irrigation systems became common. Access to water meant survival, and control over it meant power. What began as occasional clashes evolved into something far more constant, organized, repeated, and ongoing conflict. Organized armies began to move with purpose. Conflicts were no longer brief or accidental. They were deliberate, repeated, and strategic. Captured enemies were not simply released or ignored. Many were marked, controlled, and forced into submission. Those who lost were often turned into labor. Slaves were put to work on massive projects, including the very irrigation systems that allowed their conquerors to thrive. The same canals that sustained entire populations were built on the backs of those who had no freedom left. In this new structure, authority took on a clear form. A ruler, often called a king, promised security and stability. But that protection came at a cost: taxes, physical labor, and complete obedience to the system. Violence was no longer temporary or situational. It became embedded in daily life, woven into the foundation of growing civilizations. Across regions like Nile River, Indus Valley, and Yellow River, the pattern repeated itself. Each area had its own environment, its own resources, and its own cultural identity. Yet, despite these differences, the outcome remained strikingly similar. Systems of hierarchy formed, and once established, they reinforced themselves over time. Hierarchy did not remain isolated. It expanded. It shaped societies, built institutions, and eventually gave rise to organized states. And with the rise of the state came something enduring, continuous, structured conflict. What we call civilization was not carefully designed from the start. It was not a smooth or intentional evolution toward progress. Instead, it emerged as a consequence, a response to settling down and abandoning mobility. Stopping came with a cost, and once that choice was made, there was no simple path back to the freedom that existed before. The systems created in that moment have continued to shape human life ever since. Before you go, thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. If you found this breakdown valuable, consider leaving a like or sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support makes a real difference and helps this content reach more people.